A story of loss, hope, family, and the heart of a dog. Rosie, after the hurricane. 2.5 long weeks after the hurricane, the Bennett family was finally allowed to return home. But the street they remembered was gone. Familiar trees had been stripped bare. Cars rested where front yards used to be. And at the end of the block, where a pale blue house had once stood, there was only a concrete foundation, buried beneath broken wood and mud. Leah called Rosie's name one more time, not because she expected a response, but because leaving without calling felt impossible. 3 weeks earlier, home had looked and sounded very different. It sounded like 13-year-old Sophie laughing as Rosie skidded across the kitchen floor, like Mark pretending he didn't share food from his plate, like Sophie saying, "We'll be back," whenever the family left the home without Rosie. Rosie was a golden retriever mix with one white paw and a habit of sitting at the front window every afternoon. Long before the school bus appeared, she seemed to know Sophie was coming. Her tail would begin thumping against the wall, slowly at first, then faster as the bus turned the corner. To Rosie, her family left, but they always came back. The news warned of an incoming storm. Rosie had been frightened of thunder since the day the Bennetts adopted her. During storms, Sophie made a place beside her bed and rested one hand against Rosie's back until the trembling stopped. But this storm, a hurricane, would be different from any they had weathered before. Along the nearby bay, crews secured boats as dark clouds gathered over the water. The Bennetts had weathered storms before, and they took every warning seriously. They bought bottled water, batteries, flashlights, plywood, and enough food for Rosie to last well beyond the storm. Sophie carried the dog food toward the SUV, where Rosie watched through the window, unaware that the family would be forced to leave the only home they knew. Overnight, the bay rose across the marshes, and evacuation routes filled with cars moving inland. The hurricane had been upgraded to a Category 3, and the evacuation order came sooner than anyone had expected. The Bennetts packed clothes, documents, bottled water, and Rosie's food into the car. Mark began fastening Rosie's leash while Sophie climbed into the back seat. Suddenly, the winds picked up with a vengeance, and a section of the wooden fence tore loose and slammed against the side of the house. Rosie panicked. She twisted backward, and before anyone could stop her, Rosie bolted across the yard and disappeared between two houses. They searched through rain that grew heavier by the minute. Mark ran from porch to porch. Leah called until her voice cracked. Sophie shook Rosie's treat container and listened for the sound of tags. Sadly, there was no sign of Rosie. A sheriff's vehicle stopped at the corner. Water was already covering the road behind them, and the last evacuation route was about to close. They were told they had to leave. Now. Sophie stood in the rain, staring in the direction in which Rosie had vanished. Getting into the car felt like abandoning her, but staying would not bring Rosie back. It would only leave 3 more lives trapped in the path of the storm. At the evacuation center, the Bennetts watched the hurricane cross their neighborhood on a small television mounted to the wall. They registered Rosie with every shelter and rescue group they could reach. They posted her photograph online: golden coat, one white front paw, faded red collar, frightened by thunder. Please do not chase. The first day brought no news, then the second, then the fifth. A rescue volunteer reported seeing a light-colored dog near the closed evacuation zone. but the animal vanished whenever anyone approached. There was no photograph and no way to know whether it was Rosie. On the 7th day, aerial footage showed the Bennett house was gone. Sophie stopped asking when they could go back to look for Rosie. By the 2nd week, shelters had taken in hundreds of displaced animals. The family studied every new photograph. None of them was Rosie. They began to understand that they might never know what happened to her. But Rosie had survived the night. In the morning, when the storm finally subsided, she followed familiar scents through a landscape she no longer recognized. Streets were blocked by branches. Fences had disappeared. Salt water and mud covered the ground. Still, Rosie found her way back. The house was gone, but the front steps remained. She circled the foundation, searching for the window where she had waited for Sophie's bus and the family that she loved. During the days and nights that followed, she sheltered beneath part of a neighboring garage that had remained standing. She drank rainwater collected in overturned containers. At night, she crept toward food and water left throughout the damaged neighborhood by animal rescue volunteers. The volunteers saw paw prints. Once, they caught a brief glimpse of a dog in the beam of a flashlight, but the dog was too frightened to let a stranger near, and there was no way to know if it was Rosie. Every morning, Rosie returned to the front steps and waited for her family. As soon as authorities reopened the neighborhood to residents, the Bennetts drove home carrying gloves, storage bins, and the quiet hope of finding Rosie. When they reached their property, nobody spoke. Mark stepped onto the foundation and stared at the empty space that had once been the front door. Leah found a bent picture frame beneath a board. Sophie stood on the surviving front steps. Then she called Rosie's name. Leah and Mark also began calling her name. Sophie carried Rosie's worn yellow tennis ball in her coat pocket. She knew it made no sense. Rosie had been missing nearly 3 weeks, and the house where she had waited was no longer there. Still, Sophie brought it. They waited. From somewhere behind the collapsed garage came a faint metallic sound, the soft clink of tags against a collar. Rosie stepped cautiously from the shadows of what had once been a garage. She was thinner. Her golden coat was dark with mud, and one paw barely touched the ground. For a moment, she simply stared at them, as though the people she had been waiting for could not possibly be real. Sophie dropped to the ground with a relieved look on her face. She didn't run. She didn't reach. She only held out the yellow tennis ball and said the words Rosie had heard hundreds of times before. "We came back." Rosie's ears lifted. Her tail moved once. Then they ran towards one another. Rosie crossed the ruined yard and fell into Sophie's arms. Leah wrapped herself around both of them. Mark knelt beside Rosie and pressed his face into her wet fur. They had returned expecting to recover pieces of a house. Instead, they found the part of home that mattered most and had been waiting for them. At the veterinary clinic, Rosie was treated for dehydration, weight loss, and several cuts on her paws. None of the injuries was permanent. That night, in the small rental house where the Bennetts were staying, Rosie ate slowly and drank from a blue bowl beside the kitchen wall. When Sophie went to bed, Rosie followed her. She turned in a small circle, lowered herself onto the blanket, and fell into a deep sleep. For the first time in 19 nights, neither of them had to wonder where the other was. Months later, the Bennetts returned to their new house. It was smaller, in a different location, and almost everything inside it was different. But they realized what was most important. Their entire family had survived. Above the front door, Mark hung the old house number plaque they had pulled from the wreckage while waiting for the replacement. Rosie found the front window on her first day, and one afternoon, Long before the yellow school bus turned the corner, her tail began thumping against the wall. Storms can take walls, roofs, photographs, and every familiar thing. But Rosie had never been waiting for a building. She had been waiting for her family. And finally, the Bennett family was whole again. If Rosie's story touched your heart, subscribe to Paws Central for more stories of rescue, love, and unexpected heroes.